René Guénon was and is known as the father of tradition. He was a French metaphysician, writer, and editor who was amongst a few recognized in building the foundation of the traditionalist or perennialist school of thought in the early 20th century. Guénon explored many of the major world religions, exploring the universal truths that were manifested in various forms within them. His most famous argument was that of the intellectual and spiritual bankruptcy of the modern world. He critiqued and tore apart the modern world for abandoning traditions in which he believed were carriers of universal truth, wisdom, and spirituality. Rather than a focus on theology, Guénon spent most of his work on metaphysics, esotericism, and symbolism. Guénon's journey began in the heart of France, but his quest for truth would lead him far beyond its borders. René Guénon was born in Blois, in France, in 1886. In a strict Catholic environment, he was schooled by Jesuits. He moved to Paris in pursuit of mathematics at the Collège Rollin. However, in 1905, he abandoned his formal higher educational studies. Guénon delved deep into the waters of French occultism, and in which he eventually became a leading member in several secret organizations, such as Theosophical, Spiritualistic, Masonic, and Gnostic societies. In June 1909, Guénon founded the occultist journal La Noce. It lasted a little over 2 years and carried most of Guénon's writings from this period. In this image, René Guénon, who is seated at the back left, is present at the Congress and Covenant of Spiritualist Masonry. Held on June the 7th and 9th in 1908 in Paris, the aim was to introduce France and initiatory Masonry. It's important to note that Guénon later on came to disown his previous involvement in occultist movements. He classed it as counterfeit spirituality because he saw that it was traditional esotericism instead. It was during this period that there was a circulation around whether Guénon was initiated into Taoism or Islam, or both. But it's been perceived that his catalyzing moment was when he was in contact with representatives of the Advaita school of Vedanta, what led him to seriously study the doctrines of Taoism, Hinduism, and perhaps Islam at that time. Still part of an intense Catholic environment, René Guénon was heavily influenced by many prominent Catholic intellectuals of his time. These intellectuals conducted classes at the Sorbonne on the philosophy of science. Guénon was engaged and involved in the academia life of attending lectures, socializing, and even delivering lectures at Sorbonne. It was till the 1920s he then started publishing his first books, his first one being famously known as An Introduction to the Study of the Hindu Doctrines. This is where he first critiques Europe's civilizations and their neglect for not learning the Eastern ways, in which he provides Hinduism as one of the many examples. He embodied a major shift away from occultism and voyaged into the esoteric traditions within the framework of the great religions. As a Catholic himself, it makes sense that René was intrigued by Christian esotericism found in Catholic traditions. He was a regular contributor to Regnabit, if I pronounce that correctly, or Regnabit, a Catholic journal, the Sacré-Cœur Review, founded and was edited by P. Anizan. His articles illuminated how the reorientation of Guénon's thinking led to tradition becoming a controlling theme. René Guénon experienced yet another pivotal shift in his life, arguably his biggest one by his wife dying abruptly in 1928 and him moving to Cairo in Egypt in 1930. In Cairo, Guénon was initiated into the Sufic order of the Shadhalites. I may have pronounced this wrong. converting his name to Abdul Wahid Yahya. He married again and lived a modest and retiring existence. Études Traditionalism, if I've pronounced that right. A formerly theosophical journal was transformed under Guénon's influence during this time into the principal European forum for traditionalist thought. Guénon published at least 25 articles. Although he had found his own resting place within Islam, Guénon remained hopeful in the possibility of genuine initiatic channels surviving within Christianity. He never entirely disintegrated his interest in Freemasonry either, returning to it in some of his last writings. Only shortly before his death did he conclude that there was no effective hope of an esoteric regeneration within either Masonry or Catholicism. Guénon published 17 books during his lifetime, and at least 8 posthumous collections and compilations have since appeared. He is undoubtedly a prolific writer. In his writings, he ranges over a vast terrain: Vedanta, the Chinese tradition, Christianity, Sufism, Kabbalah, and mythology from all over the world, the secret traditions of Gnosticism, alchemy, folklore, and so on, always intent on excavating their underlying principles and showing them to be formal manifestation of the one primordial tradition. Major works include, but are not limited to, The Crisis of the Modern World, The Reign of Quantity and the Signs of the Times, and Introduction to the Study of the Hindu Doctrines. Whilst Guénon did repeatedly turn to Oriental teachings, it is important to note, as Ananda Coomaraswamy has noted, if Guénon wants the West to turn to Eastern metaphysics, it is not because they are Eastern, but because this is metaphysics. If Eastern metaphysics differed from a Western metaphysics, one or the other would not be metaphysics. Guénon's writings can be divided into 5 categories that roughly correspond with a particular period of his life. The 5 categories include pre-1912 articles in occultist periodicals, exposés of occultism, especially spiritualism and theosophy, expositions of Oriental metaphysics, treatments both of the European tradition and of initiation in general, and critiques of modern civilization, what he later becomes more known for. Guénon's influence still remains minimal today in the Western academic community at large. However, he is the seminal influence in the development of traditionalism. Like other traditionalists, Guénon did not perceive his work as an exercise in creativity or personal originality, repeatedly emphasizing that in the metaphysical domain there is no room for individualist considerations of any kind. In a letter to a friend, he wrote, "I have no other merit than to have expressed to the best of my ability some traditional ideas." When reminded of the people who had been profoundly influenced by his writings, René Guénon calmly replied, "Such disposition becomes a homage rendered to the doctrine expressed by us in a way that is totally independent of any individualistic considerations." Most traditionalists regard Guénon as the providential interpreter of this age. It was his role to remind a forgetful world, in a way that can be ignored but not refuted, of first principles and to restore a lost sense of the absolute. There are many who support traditionalism without even knowing its roots back to Guénon. In fact, it was because of the traditionalist school of thought that led to the architectural movement of traditionalist architecture at the beginning of the 20th century in Europe, a parallel movement to modernist architecture. King Charles, through his time as a prince, also had and has been vocal on his views in traditionalism, often quoting Guénon and many other notable traditionalists. In fact, King Charles is also a patron of the Temenos Academy in London, that echoes the traditional perennial philosophy, bringing in many speakers from around the world and the students to honor the eternal flame. It seems that Guénon's legacy isn't absolute, not entirely, and still runs today, especially through this channel, The Pursuit of Wisdom. Okay, so here are my unfiltered thoughts about everything that I have learned for this lecture. Wow, I think René Guénon is definitely an interesting man. He's led such a life that has gone through so many developments and changes in these niche fields of metaphysics, spirituality, and just trying to understand the existence of, well, of our lives, of our purpose here. But it's not necessarily that he is, from what I interpret, trying to find the truth, but more so understanding that it's already been there, we just need to discover it. And he sees tradition as being the one thing that always lasts through many generations, so that may be a great place to start in. It's such a shame, in my opinion, that Guénon isn't as known or as noticed as I think he should be, considering how important so many traditions have remained within so many cultures and religions around the world, and most of them are to some extent in credit to him for starting this traditionalist school of thought, to starting movements where even some people today, advocate for preserving traditions through religion or through communities, etc., through environments as well. And when you think of great scientists or great thinkers, the first people that come to mind for me personally is Oppenheimer, Nikola Tesla. They've all lived very intricately deep personal lives that shapes them to who they are. And I think René Guénon is definitely one of them. I'm sure if there was a documentary on his personal life, his upbringing, how he began and came his way into publishing all these works, I would most certainly be interested. I mean, I didn't even know up until for this lecture that he was heavily studied into Freemasonry and occultism, especially towards the beginning of his career or his life, which is very interesting because he kind of diverted into its opposite equivalent, arguably. And so there's a lot of things that would have gone in his mind, through his mind, to come to the conclusions that he had done in his work. And I think it always helps when you try to understand a great person's work, is to understand how they were in their lifetime. Like Einstein, for example, the genius didn't just spring out of nowhere. He definitely had loads of curiosity when he was younger, and exposure to inventive thinking when he was a patent clerk, etc. These are very pivotal stages in one's life to then shape them to who they are destined to become. And I think with René Guénon, there's a lot to unpack and a lot to explore. I do plan on reading his books. I do have the first copy of his first book in French. I did shelve it to motivate myself to learn French to a great enough standard to read it. However, that has only just made me delay it because learning a language in my lifestyle and routine is not so easy than I was expecting. So I am going to buy the English translation, and after I read The Perennial Philosophy by Aldous Huxley, I will then go on to read his first book, The Introduction to the Study of Hindu Doctrines, to see what his state of mind was and what ideas he was expressing. And I look forward to doing a book review later on in the future for that too. I hope this lecture was informative and enjoyable, and I just want to end this video with my disclaimer that I am by no means claiming that I am knowledgeable in everything, except that I am in the humble pursuit of wisdom. Thank you so much for watching.